So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Andrew Miller. I lead the commission group, but I also serve on the adult faith formation panel here at the church. And I guess it's been probably 6 months ago or something, we were talking about different classes that we wanted to offer. And one that came up was a class on social capital. It's something that is very dear to my heart. I'm very passionate about it. I was fortunate enough to grow up outside of Atlanta in Marietta. And lived with, people of all different backgrounds, different socioeconomic statuses. And, I've seen how social capital can really work. I grew up in a high school that was very diverse, black, whites, Latinos. And, that's something I want to give up for anything in this world, really, to have that ability to grow up with these individuals, share our stories, help each other out. And so Dee was asking me, why did I decide to do this class or lead this class? And since graduating and being in Charlotte, I had the opportunity to serve with the Big Brother, Big Sister program, and had a kid that I started with in third, fourth grade, and he just went to college recently. So, this is something very passionate. I've seen it firsthand what can happen. It doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot of money. It just takes a little bit of time. And so I think we can make some really big strides in Charlotte. And so I'm glad that everybody's here today. I think we've got a great panel. And so I think we'll start with prayer, and then I'll go through some facts and figures. We'll have some discussion. We'll let our panelists answer some questions. I want this to be a discussion both ways, so feel free to come up with some questions on your own, and we'll go through those. So if you'll bow your heads, we'll start with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, as we come together today, we ask that you will just open up our hearts and minds, that we can listen to each other, that we can have frank conversation about ways that we can make our city a better place for not only those within this room, but for those who are maybe less fortunate, who need guidance. Your power is so impactful on individuals, and I just hope that you will just open up our hearts and minds so that we can, continue to grow together as a unified city in this world. We pray all these things in your Son's holy name. Amen. So if any of you have not read the Leading on Opportunity Task Force report, I highly encourage you to read it. These slides that I'm going to go through now is really just to give you a little bit of background information on why we're doing this class, some key statistics for Charlotte. So the report, which Dee is very familiar with, he was one of the co-chairs of the report. There's really three interrelated determinants that affect an individual's performance or their opportunity in this world: early care and child education, college and career readiness, and family and child stability. But when you look at those three characteristics, social capital is encompassed in all of them. So that's very important that we understand that, social capital can go through many different aspects of these three determinants. And then also segregation is another key one that is throughout all of these different determinants. And we'll talk about some of those in a little bit more. Mentoring relationships. So I talked about that a little bit when I began, but 64% of affluent children have mentoring relationships beyond their extended family. Nearly 2/3 of children from low-income backgrounds do not. I mean, you think about that for a minute. You have a coach or a Sunday school teacher or somebody that can help you along, give you advice. Sorry, these are on audio slide. Give you advice and help you along the way is, very important. Another thing is important to consider is we need to start thinking about other things besides a four-year college degree. If you look here, there's 55% of middle-skilled jobs in the workforce. These are jobs that people can make a really good earning with. Sorry, let me go back. Who make a really good income with, and they're significant in our city. And so trying to encourage individuals where college maybe isn't for them to really consider that as a job option. Affordable housing. There's currently a deficit of approximately 34,000 affordable housing units for people earning 60% or more below the area median income. That's a lot. You think about being able to have a home. We talk about the family and family stability being such a key factor for individuals. Being able to have these units is important, so we need to think about that as we're making decisions with our government. Segregation and upward mobility, I think most of us are probably aware of this, but we got to face the facts that Charlotte is a very segregated community. If you look at these maps, this is for both by wealth and by race, and sorry it's a little small up there, but you can see that the outer northern and southern regions are very, it's very segregated. It's also where the wealthy and the racial divides are there. One of the things that was really important that the Opportunity Task Force came about was looking at the odds of moving from the bottom fifth to the top fifth. Less than 5% in our city. We were at the bottom. 50 out of 50 cities were ranked. And that's something we need to really embrace and take into consideration. Also, only 21% of college students and families from the bottom income obtain a bachelor's degree, compared to 99% of college students from families in the top quintile. So we need to think about ways that we can help improve the mobility for others within our community besides, just ourselves. This is another one, childcare and education, right? So over 3,000 children from birth to 5 were on the wait list for childcare subsidies. Childcare is expensive. We all know that. Many of us have children, and I'm going through this now. It's expensive, but imagine doing that with less financial stability. And it's one of the biggest differences that can impact an individual as they grow older, right? If they can get that start from the beginning to have that financial ability to go to school and to learn the basics at an earlier age. And proficiency rates. So third grade proficiency rates are 39% across the district. And if you look at the statistics on, white girls are at 72%, Latino boys are only at 18%. And I think there's some great strides, and even our church is making great strides in this effort to improve that third grade efficiency level. So next I'm going to skip out of this because this is continuing to delay. So I wanted to take the opportunity now for you to get to know your neighbor a little bit. And I want you to introduce yourself to whoever's sitting next to you, hopefully somebody that you don't know already on the other side. Who is one individual outside of your immediate family that played a significant role in you achieving your success in life today? And what did that individual do for you? So if you could just spend a few minutes, discuss that with each other, and get to know your neighbor. I want to introduce all of our panelists, and I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves a little bit because I don't want to forget anything about them. So I'll give each panelist an opportunity to speak a minute or two about themselves, and I'll let Dee begin if he doesn't mind.
Great. Good morning. Glad to be here. I'm Dee Odell. I grew up in Oxford, Mississippi, a wonderful small town, and ended up here in Charlotte through a number of moves in my banking career. My wife and I have 3 teenage daughters who are freshman, sophomore, and junior in high school. And a couple of years ago, I was invited to join my good friend Ophelia Garman-Brown in leading the task force that ultimately published the report that really is guiding a lot of the work that is being done in our community today, and probably easily the most rewarding thing I've been involved in. From there, I've been involved in, I'm now on the board of the Y, the United Way, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Community Foundation. I also have joined in with a small group of people in a multi-year mentoring program. So the Friedland Foundation identifies high potential kids who are 7th graders, rising 8th graders, and matches them with mentors for a 5-year walk through high school into college. So I'm a couple of years into that. I have a much better appreciation for the impact of social capital, having spent some time in the work in the task force and subsequently talking and throughout our community one of the things that we did on the task force was we went around and had listening sessions all over town. And one young man, stood up and said, I didn't understand, until my junior year in high school. I didn't realize, that I needed to have a plan, that, the grades in 9th and 10th grade really mattered. And so here's a young man who said, I needed a life navigator, someone to help me, understand. And I think that's the essence of this is, what can we do to be those navigators, to create a movement in our community. We've got a lot of great things going on in our community, but there are huge gaps. And the gaps I think that we can both most easily bridge are those in social capital, because it is something that we all have. And I think about this, think about your church friends, your work friends, think about your Christmas card list, how broad that reaches. And you think about the connections you have, and then think about how you use that social capital. And I know we'll talk a bit more about this later, but I think that is the great opportunity that we all face today, is to think about how we open up our networks of social capital.
Thank
Boris.
you. Good morning. My name is Boris Henderson. I was born and raised in Charlotte, and and driving in this morning, I was thinking, how do you prepare to speak on a panel when you don't know what the questions are, who's going to be there? But it occurred to me, number one, we're meeting at a church, which probably means everybody's friendly. But I also thought about, when thinking about my life and why I was asked to serve, I thought about the fact that a lot of great things have happened in my life because, quite frankly, God has chosen to use me for whatever reason. So, like I said, I was born and raised in Charlotte, and, my kind of personal story is, as unbelievable as it is, the first 8 years of my life, I lived in a house in North Mecklenburg County with no indoor plumbing. So it was right here in Charlotte. I'm 40, so that wasn't too long ago. Then lived in one of Charlotte's most dangerous neighborhoods. If you're a native Charlottean, you probably remember Fairview Homes and Wyatt Street, which is now Genesis Park. I've got scars to prove it, both physical and psychological and emotional scars. Then moved into a Habitat house, and that was probably, when I tell my story, moving into a Habitat house really transformed and changed the trajectory of my life. And that was, Habitat Charlotte was principally founded by 7 churches, and this is one of the churches. So you should be very proud to know that you've been at this for a long time, and as a church and as a congregation, you've walked the talk. But moved into a Habitat house. My grades and family situation stabilized, and through relationships and organizations within the community, I believe it or not, ended up at Davidson College, and not because I was a great football player. Actually, I was a better wrestler. There's a guy I wrestled with in high school who was here to probably prove that. But it was, again, through relationships. Davidson grad was over an after-school program at the time, and he told me about Davidson and encouraged me to apply, and he encouraged me to keep my grades up and all the other things you need to overcome certain challenges in life. And Davidson, I spent 4 years at Davidson, which not only did I get a great education, but I met one of the most important people in my life. And that person was actually a member here for a long time. And, his name is Ed Crutchfield. And most people who know Ed when he was helping to build Charlotte would probably never guess he would have a really good friend and mentee who grew up in a house with no indoor plumbing, kid who lived in a Habitat house, what could they possibly have in common? But Ed and I, through my relationship with Ed, I'd gone to Davidson College and, moved out of the Habitat House, but it really does take a lot more than, a good house and education for people to, and I'm speaking personally, to overcome, because there's traumatic things that some of the people we're referring to experience. For example, my oldest sister in the neighborhood I mentioned, she saw 2 people killed at a very young age. Drug deals go bad. So how do you, once you get the folks out of the situation, how do you prepare them to lead a life of purpose and meaning? And with me, it's been Ed Crutchfield through a very personal relationship of, he always says, Bobo, it boils down to just being a friend. So we've talked about marriage. We've talked about, we've invested together. When I'm getting off track, he's not afraid to say, hey, get out of the ditch. There's a bright day ahead. So Ed has been, we talk about the importance of mentoring. He's been one of the most significant relationships in my life, and that's my message today. 3 things I wrote down was, this is tough work, and it's you can't just do it for yourself. We're doing it because we feel like God is calling us to do it, and if that's not the foundation of why we're here, there's gonna be some stormy nights, and it's easy to say, I'm busy at work, I can't quite get to it. Secondly, I wrote down education. As Peter Drucker said, we've moved into a knowledge-based economy. The manufacturing jobs where you can not finish high school and provide for your family, I think for the most part, those jobs are gone. And then, relationships with people and organizations to gain access to improve our lives and conditions, and so we can help other folks. So that's my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. Boris and I share similar backgrounds in terms of I was born and raised here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Had the opportunity to return from Washington, D.C. after about 15 years. So this is a new Charlotte, a new place than when I left many, many years ago. So I'm Stacey Brown, and I had the opportunity to go to West Charlotte, graduate from West Charlotte Senior High School here in Charlotte. That too also looks like a very different place now. When I attended a pretty diverse school in terms of white, Asian students, not really as many Latino students, but some American Indian students. But once again, that has changed since I've returned. But my experience at West Charlotte Senior High School was a very positive experience with lots of resources and individuals who pushed us as students to do all that we could in order to take advantage of the resources. My parents also were born and reared here in Charlotte, North Carolina. My mom, a licensed practical nurse, my dad, a business owner, and both parents, well, I would say I'm a first-generation college student, so was able to apply to many schools in North Carolina, but accepted Appalachian State University. I am a proud alumni and involved alumni of Appalachian State University, and there may be some other alums that are out there. And then it was at Appalachian that, because no one in my immediate family I knew had a master's degree. So it was there that I met some great people in the administration office, in the dean of students, we were talking about that office, who I shared that I was interested in doing what I do in college for a career. So what does that mean? I was really involved at Appalachian State. And I didn't realize that, hey, I could actually major in higher education, student affairs, higher education administration, and do this for a lifetime. So it was Dr. Gregory Blemling at Appalachian, who's the vice chancellor of student affairs, Barbara Day, another name who was assistant vice chancellor, who said, Stacey, these are the places that you should apply to for graduate school. And I did that. And not only did I do that, they said, do not pay for graduate school. And that's always resonated with me and always stood out for me, and really has set the foundation for the work that I do. When I left Washington, D.C., I retired from the University of Maryland, College Park, great place to work. I now have my own business with college and career consulting, helping families, helping students to make sound decisions on attending college and not going into debt on attending college. And then being very strategic in how we look at a higher education, because there's some great resources. And in terms of social capital and what we share with our young people, what we share with adults who are looking to return to school, being strategic, because there's some places that they may be working where the employer will pay for tuition. There's also some opportunities in middle and high school that students should be taking advantage of that can really cut those college costs. So social capital is near and dear to me. I bought my book here because I actually talk a little bit about that. I talk a lot about that in the book in terms of students finding out about opportunities based on their resources and their networks that they've been a part of, whether it's in their community, whether it's in their churches, in their schools, and how do they leverage those relationships. As a resident of Grier Heights, and I'm also the president of the Grier Heights Community Improvement Organization, I've been amazed over this past year of the amount of social capital that actually is in Grier Heights, from Crossroads and all of the relationships that Crossroads has brought into the community, as well as the different churches that are in the community and just other organizations. A concern that I have as the president is, how do you build the confidence and the intrinsic motivation as well as extrinsic motivation of residents, all residents, in order to take advantage of the social capital that is there. So I'll stop there. I neglected to say that we have 3 children, a husband and 3 children. My daughter is here with me. She's in 9th grade at Myers Park High School. This is her first year, of course, so she's adjusting to high school. And we have a 12-year-old, Tommy Brown, and a 2-year-old who is keeping us busy every single day. So I will stop there.
So I'm Charles Bowman. I was born not far from here in Concord, what was old Cabarrus Memorial Hospital. I grew up in Thomasville, North Carolina. I lived on the campus of the Baptist Children's Homes there from the age of about 5 to 18. Both my parents worked there. Probably my first introduction to children that really nobody cared about. They were kicked to the curb, abandoned, and they were just there. Went to Chapel Hill, to college. Also, I try to hide it, but I have a law degree from Chapel Hill. I did go to Duke. I have a master's degree in public policy from Duke. Got married in Duke Chapel. Lived in Raleigh for a year and moved to Charlotte in 1983. Left for a couple years to go back and be the associate director of the Moorhead Foundation for about 2 years. Came back to Charlotte. Continued practicing law, joined Bank of America, or it was Nations Bank at the time I joined it, in 1996. I've had a variety of jobs there, and the most relevant and why I'm here, hey Catherine, back there, good to see you. Why I'm here is I'm the market president for Bank of America here in Charlotte, and I also run the group that supports the 20 largest markets across the country. So I have a perspective about some of the challenges and problems that large urban areas and the markets that we operate in face every day. Part of my job is to help, I don't control much, but I help influence some of our philanthropic efforts here in Charlotte and what investments we're going to make in what institutions. I think Andrew Plepler was really the first choice, so I'm the second choice from the bank. Andrew runs our national foundation. But I will say, I'm interested in this issue of social capital on several levels. One, I think, is the individual level. What can you do as a person? What can you do as a church from an organizational perspective? What can we do as corporations? What's our role in that? What's government's role in it? And then how do we as a community sort of change the trajectory of our people? I also look at it from an economic imperative. There are really two levels. One is I call moral ethical, which is we're in a church, and I'm sure you're all here for part of that. And I do think we have a moral obligation to the less advantaged. But it's also we will not thrive as a community if we don't tackle these issues. We just won't. I'm also on the board of Read Charlotte. I've been on the board of Project Lift. And I will say one of the things I'm most impassioned about is this whole effort around reading. I don't know about you guys, but the fact that only 39% of our third graders throughout the county, that's throughout the county, and that cuts across all socioeconomic lines. It happens to be worse in some parts of the city, but only 39% of our kids read on grade level by third grade. That means they've got about a 75% chance of not finishing high school. I agree with Boris. I think the economy's changed. You used to be able to get a job, make a living wage, take care of your family. If you didn't go through high school, maybe, and most of my relatives, frankly, worked in Cannon Mills back when Cannon Mills was thriving in Kannapolis. I have a 104-year-old aunt. This is really interesting. So I hope it's in my DNA somewhere. She's 104 years old, and she went to work at 14 at Cannon Mills, and she worked until she was 75. And she was excited to get a 10-cent raise about every other year. Those jobs aren't there anymore. So how do we compete in a world order that is very, very different, and it changes at a rate that is so fast that nothing that we've done in the past, we can't do it the old way. So I'm really interested in sort of how do we measure this stuff? How do we know a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, are we making any progress? Or do we have to wait until we have riots in the streets again to have another wake-up call to say, okay, what are we going to do about it? Where are we going to go? Can we make a dent? By 2025, can we have more than 40% of our third graders reading on grade level? And the truth is, if a kid's not reading on grade level by first grade, they're probably not going to get there by third. So we need tutors. We need people personally involved. I also think about this in terms of there's a transactional level, and I say that's where you may be at a stage in life where all you have is 2 hours on a weekend, and so you go to crisis assistance and you sort clothes. That's meaningful. Maybe it's more relational. Maybe you're a tutor, as Dee is, or maybe you're in Big Brothers, Big Sisters. It's more relational. And then there's the governance piece of, are you on boards? Are you in positions of influence where you can help direct where resources are placed? Corporations, what can they do? Whether you have one employee or you have 100,000 employees, there are things that you can do. I don't want to make this about Bank of America, but the fact that we give family leave of 16 weeks. Didn't have to do that, but we're trying to be a leader in that. Every employee at Bank of America makes at least $15 an hour. Didn't have to do that, not telling everybody that they should do that. But those are the kinds of things that I think everybody can do at every level, because this won't be solved with feel-good philanthropy.
Thank you very much. So now I have a few questions I've prepared, but I also want to open this up to those in the audience, but we'll start. And those on the panel can just, add to these as you see fit. But so how do you define social capital? Does anybody on the panel want to start with that, and then we can add in as necessary?
I'll jump in. I think of social capital as the networks that we have, the connections that we have that allow us to get things done. They're also the networks that provide support for us and open up opportunities. And so as I said earlier, I think about this in lots of different ways. It's, you know, it's your neighborhood group that your friends there, it's friends at church, friends from work, it's your LinkedIn contact list, it's your Christmas card list, your alumni list from college or graduate school, but it's really that broad network that you feel like you can call on, whether it is to, you know, have someone, your child or another child, kind of go and learn from someone about a job, or to call on someone to help you in a volunteer activity, or a business contact that helps you, you know, with a new sale or a referral. That is the broad network that each of us has, and whether you're conscious of it or not, the power of that network and how you use that network is really social capital. And I think it exists for all people, but I think in a poor neighborhood, the social capital are much tighter links to people of a similar position, and we have much greater access to friends of friends and a broader access.
I would certainly agree, and you know, it's not a new concept. You know, when I was first started in business, it was, you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That's the language, you know, we've used in the, you know, middle and upper income and levels, where we know to get certain things done in life, you need to have access to the right relationships and the right people and the right influences. So that's what I think about when I hear the new part of my. I'm not negative on the word, but using the term social capital as if it's something that's new and falling out of the sky. It's something that we know we've used as individuals to get ahead in life, and to maybe we used it to become a member of this church, but it's nothing new under the sun. It's something we're all aware of.
And that's funny you say that, because my sister asked me last night when I told her what I was doing. She said, okay, what exactly is social capital? And I explained it to her, and she was like, oh, like, I already know what that is. But we just put a name to it, I guess. And when I think about our networks, because you're right, we're all involved with different networks, whether it's our community, whether it's our churches, whether it's just across the city and organizations that we're involved in. But really, how do we use what we have? How do we use our resources to help others to gain access? And when we are in positions or spaces of power, I would say, you know, how do we invite others to be a part of those discussions, a part of those talks that involves the people that we're talking about? You know, not really being afraid to ask them, would you come in and be a part of these conversations? And then not being afraid if they tell us, hey, I need a job, or I'm looking for a job, I've been trained in this area, and we know someone who actually could hire them, that we put them in contact with one another.
Yeah, I think about it in terms of, it's really about relationship, and that may be relationship on a personal level. But I think it's also beyond that. Your relationship with the political and economic institutions that run this city. Is it okay that we're segregated in our schools? Is it okay that we concentrate poverty? And is it okay that we think it's somebody else's problem? Is it okay that we engage in our own NIMBYism, not in my backyard, when somebody needs to build an affordable housing unit nearby? Is it okay that we have workers who have to live 60 miles from here with no form of transportation, and they're working 2 jobs to maybe make rent? In fact, today, if you're working minimum wage jobs, you got to work 2 jobs to pay for an average apartment in Charlotte. I think those are social capital issues. Again, I break this down to the personal level, the organizational level, and sort of the systems level. And if we don't change the systems, it's not going to change. So we've really got to focus not only what we do personally and individually, but we have to change the systems. Early child care. Are you willing to raise our taxes to have universal child care? It's not a rhetorical question. It's one we're going to face, because we have to do some of these things in order to be successful as a community. Unpopular topics. create a lot of political churn. And the other thing I'll say is I think our civic discourse is so base. We need to work on that too. It's how we talk to each other. It's what we say to each other. It's how we relate. Can we be civilized? We've lost some of this civility. I will say, not to pick on Charlotte, but our problems aren't unique. I know the Chetty study had us 50 out of 50, but does everybody know who number 49 is? Atlanta, Georgia. Does anybody know who number 48 is? Research Triangle. A lot of these communities are across the South. I encourage you to do two things if you haven't done it, leave here. Go look up, just Google Chetty, C-H-E-T-T-Y, Chetty study, and just read the summary. You don't need to read the 200 pages. And go to Google Leading on Opportunity, and you'll get the executive summary from Dee's work, Dee and the committee's work. A lot of it you've seen here on some of these slides. Just read them. It won't take you that long. It'll take you about half an hour to hit the summaries at the most. So our problems aren't unique. I love to throw Los Angeles in there on affordable housing. We have a deficit of 34,000 units. Anybody want to guess what it is in Los Angeles? 550,000. If you go there anytime soon, ask somebody to take you to the tent village, because it's easy to live on the street in LA because it's relatively warm most of the year. There are about 60,000 people living on a street, literally a street in Los Angeles. So we're not unique, but we're Charlotte. And I think we think of ourselves a little differently, that we can collectively come at these problems. We did it in the late 70s. We grew in the 80s. We're a proud city, a caring city, and I think we can do it. So the social capital thing, I do struggle with, and I'm a little bit of an outsider in some of this because I keep pushing people. Okay, tell me how are we going to know? How are we going to know that we're getting better? Because I can't wait. I only got so many years. I'm 62. I don't want to be 95 or 104 if I live that long with my aunt. And I know these things take a long time and you have to be patient. But with that patience, we need a sense of urgency, real urgency. You got to get after it, and you got to break it down because you can't do it all at one time. But I mean, these are three big buckets up here. And we can everybody can play some role in it, regardless where you are.
Thank you. And so to kind of move on, and on a similar topic, so what is one area that you feel Charlotte has made significant improvements since the Opportunity Task Force report, and what is one area in which you feel like we need to focus more work?
Wow. But I think, for all of our challenges, we are making progress. And I'll just use from my own personal experience. We started the whole Read Charlotte effort 3 or 4 years ago, and you haven't seen any results yet, but there's been a ton of work, and we now know where to focus and what to do, and we've sort of moved slow to move fast. So I think it won't happen in the next round of test results. The next round of test results, I think, will still be kind of flat, because the tests don't come every year. The NAEP scores only come periodically over a 2 or 3 year period of time. But I think we are really making progress on that front. Despite some of the headlines you see about Project Lift, I think that taught us a lot about what we're doing in and for the school system. The thing called opportunity culture that's now in about 5 school districts across the state probably wouldn't have happened but for Lift. And you're seeing huge successes in, again, early returns. Nothing to crow about yet, but you are seeing opportunity culture of recruitment of teachers, a stronger culture in the schools, team teaching, coaching, and then you're getting results for those kids later on. So, the Housing Trust Fund that we all passed, of $50 million, and another private fund that's being raised alongside of that. So it's $1 billion problem, but $100 million is what I call a good start. So I think we have made a lot of progress. And just the fact that this conversation is going on, I think, is indicative of progress.
I would agree, and particularly through the lens of affordable housing. I think there's, as a community, our sense of awareness and sensitivities around not in our backyard, the folks who are more resistant to affordable housing happening closer to their neighborhoods, or there's probably fewer folks who actually feel comfortable voicing those opinions, because as a community we do realize, you know, if for example, if one of the things I've just kind of focused on is the gentrification that's happened throughout the city. Any location that's close to the core, partly driven by, I think, millennials want walkable places. The expensive apartments are popping up, so land values close to the core are just jumping. Construction prices are out of whack. So the people who need to be close to work are getting pushed out farther and farther. So I've seen clear examples of, for example, the commitment that this church has made for the Grier Heights development that's in play will be a huge example of another example of how do we pull our community resources together to combat an issue within our community. And the other thing, where there's opportunity, capital will typically flow. It seems like every week I hear of a new group that wants to do affordable housing in Charlotte now, which is great. We'll get more units quicker than we otherwise would. So there's capital, there's folks who want to put units where they can find the right land to put them. So I think we're making progress in terms of awareness and the desire to do more affordable housing in Charlotte, which is great.
Let me jump in on the affordable housing thing. Don't think of what you do in the 70s with affordable housing. Think of if you build an apartment complex, you have a certain number of units that you're going to have people who are not as affluent. We're all better when we're mixed together. We really are. We're better in our schools. We'd be better in our churches if we were mixed together. And that means people with different levels of income, thoughts. You know, we're talking about gender, race, all those things. The diversity. Everything's always better with diversity. I mean, just biologically, we're better when we're diverse, right? And I think the affordable housing is a great opportunity. And this is where, if you're a developer, you got an opportunity here. It's expensive. And the lower you go on the AMI, the more expensive it becomes because the government puts so many more requirements on you. But we got to be more creative about reserving spaces for people of diverse income levels to live and work. Because, like my example, you can't put everybody who's working a minimum wage 60 miles away and bus them in. That just doesn't work economically.
Quick tactical question on the housing front. We passed the bond.
Yep.
And there's another leg of having community and business
Yep.
involved in funding another piece of it.
Yep.
It ties directly to the social capital conversation we're having. Are you optimistic about that? I think it's one of the mayor's priorities to have that closed up. Or remind me where we are on that.
Yeah, I'm optimistic about that because, again, it's a start. So the Housing Trust Fund used to be $15 million, and so we went from 15 to 50. And I think people were afraid that maybe that was pushing it too far. When I say it's $1 billion problem, the reason I say that is if you do the math, we're adding, 1,000 units a year, maybe? So 1,000 units a year with 50 million, you know, again, I'm really old by the time anybody puts a dent in it. But I think the private side's coming together with not only a fund, but I think you'll also see, well, your friend down the road here, Covenant, which got together and helped fund a project that's going to come. So that's a church. You have schools beginning to talk about availability of land, because there are two things involved in affordable housing. One's land, it's dirt and money. So I think churches are beginning to get together and say, maybe I can't build 100 units, but I can have 3-4 condos over here. So we're beginning to mobilize. I wish it were a little faster, frankly, just for my taste, but these things do take time. But we have a lot of momentum, and I think people are more aware, they're looking for creative solutions, they're business people with capital who are coming to the table. So I think we'll catch momentum. I think the mayor is really focused on it, and I'm really optimistic. We'll see.
Boris mentioned gentrification. Is the $34,000 number misleadingly low? Because maybe, I'm very familiar with the Grier Heights neighborhood, and in that neighborhood and others, is there enough of a concern that there are a lot more people who are about to be priced out, that 30,000 number is gonna be something higher?
I was just going to add to that, you know, I think that Charlotte has and is making some significant leads with affordable housing. What we also need to think about and be just as concerned about is, are the individuals that live in Grier Heights as well as other places that fall within that income bracket prepared for when those housing units do become available. And that's when we get into, you know, our careers and our college readiness. You know, do these individuals have the backgrounds and the education and the jobs in order to be able to afford the units that are going to become available? And I think that's very important. You know, sometimes that sort of gets put at the back burner because although we have good intentions, but are they really prepared? You know, from a career standpoint, from, you know, if training or college is necessary, because when it gets here, it's too late.
So one of the things I'll add on to that is that some of the follow-on work by Chetty and his group has been around what really moves the needle for young people. And if you move a family out of a low opportunity neighborhood into a higher opportunity neighborhood, the research suggests that it does very little for the parents, but the younger the child is when they move from a low opportunity neighborhood to a high opportunity neighborhood, the better the outcome for that child. Because of our seriousness of intent here in Charlotte, we have been identified by a group that Chetty is now working with that is funded by the Gates Foundation, Opportunity Insights. They are taking the work down to a neighborhood level. So if you Google Opportunity Atlas, you will get immersed into something and lose an hour or two. It is fascinating. They have the data to look back 30 years and say, take two different low-income neighborhoods and compare outcomes for kids from those neighborhoods. And so we are at the beginning of work to be done to look at the differences in what happens at a neighborhood level, which should guide us further understanding what is happening in those neighborhoods where you've got disproportionately positive outcomes for people who are growing up in poverty. What are the services, what are the structures that are there that are helping those young people actually move out? And think about how do you scale that into other neighborhoods? Because moving a young person or a family into a high opportunity neighborhood, dropping them into a brand new apartment complex there, doesn't guarantee success. Understanding the wraparound services that need to come to support that family so they can take advantage of the opportunities is critical. On the housing piece, we also have attracted the attention of a national affordable housing group, LISC, who is bringing both people and capital to the table, again, because of the seriousness of intent that they see here in Charlotte. So Charles is right. We're not statistically different from Atlanta or Raleigh. Ophelia and I said a number of times, it's better that we were 50th out of 50 than 47th, because it was a headline and it spurred us into action. We are not statistically different in those outcomes from a number of other southern cities. The fact is that we responded differently, and because of that, we've garnered national attention, and we're going to get a lot more resources and further study on issues here, which I think is all very positive.
You used one word that I want to expound on: scale. The problems don't go away without scale, and a lot of people come to talk to me about their non-for-profit. They are asking for funding for the bank, and we fund some things on an experimental basis. We'll fund more things have a proven track record. But I always look for organizations. They may have a great idea and it may have great results, but can it go to scale at some level? Because most nonprofits will top out. They'll get to about a $10 million level, and then their curve begins to bend in terms of effectiveness. So we've got to do some of these things, and then we have to scale them. We've got to figure out how to scale them. Frankly, folks, that means government needs to be involved, has to be involved, and you got to have good government to make these things work.
I would just add on to Dee's comments and your notion of being able to measure the outcome so that we can determine whether or not the policies and programs we put in place are effective. So within the habitat community I grew up in, which is Optimus Park, my best friend, J.R. Williams, he went to Chapel Hill. He's a Duke MBA. There's 2 or 3 other first-generation kids who are Chapel Hill graduates. There's several kids who graduated from high school and went to the Air Force. And, there's too many examples of first-generation kids who overcame very high hurdles to become successful in life, to call it maybe it's just a one-off. But it goes back to the community resources, services, and very personal relationships we had. In fact, we were called the Habitat Kids when we played basketball at the Johnston YMCA. But a few years ago, I served as the board chair of Habitat Charlotte, and that's one thing I tried to remind folks. You call on me to speak a lot, but there's a lot of examples of kids just like me who was given an opportunity, who were plugged into the right resources and were able to go on and lead very successful lives.
One other piece of the Chetty research, he's put out an article a couple of months back entitled Lost Einsteins. And it is to Boris's point, and to Charles's point, economically we have to make this work because there is too much potential in young people not being developed. They are the lost Einsteins. The potential to create companies, to lead organizations, to be very engaged members of society. But the investment has to be made early, and it is not cheap. The payoff is the potential that can come from each of these young people.
So we invest a lot of time, money, and efforts with these nonprofits for these kids when they're at this social capital, and then we're all excited they get to college, and you're like, yes. But I take care of a lot of these kids as they're going through, and it's good. And my interest is in how do you make them succeed at college? Because I unfortunately see a lot of the ones who are struggling, and I'll be taking care of them and treating them, and then we're all excited, and then they fail out of college, and because they don't have the resources maybe available. So I'm curious, how do we keep them successful in college if you're not hooking them in with an advisor? Because we're not all there once they get there.
I was just going to say it's important to look at the support networks that are actually at the universities that they're choosing, because if you look at some universities, some do a lot better with supporting students from low-income backgrounds than others. So it's looking at that right fit way before they get there to make sure that we're not putting them into environments in which they can't be successful. There's a federal program that's been around for years and years, over 50 years. TRIO programs, you may be familiar with them, the Upward Bound program, the Student Support Services program, which is one that I worked in at the University of Maryland. But these are programs that are at institutions that's going to provide that support that students need from the time they get there to the time that they leave, from an academic standpoint as well as a social standpoint. So we don't want to send students to schools or send students to colleges that aren't as inviting or can't give them the support that they need to be successful while they're there. And then while they're there, making sure that they take advantage of different opportunities to help them to move, to graduate and actually become self-sufficient citizens of our society.
Yeah, there are two organizations that I know of already. One's called Green Lake Scholars out of Colorado, and the other one, Luke Kassam's going to shoot me because I can't remember, but the Albemarle Corporation Foundation sponsors this organization, and they do exactly what Stacey's talking about. They match them up so they have a support network. Because usually, and it's amazing, you know, Stacey's a first generation college student, but kids who don't have a support network, you had great parents, we were talking earlier, but if you don't have great parental support, you probably aren't going to make it through college. So they match them up. They also provide summer experiences, summer opportunities, and it's a very regular, it's not regimented, but it's very consistent. So it's not just send them be a pen pal. It's provide a resource. It's it's a dialogue. It's a relationship with people, and they've had a lot of success because most of these kids, they don't have to pay for college because there are enough programs out there, but they'll also supplement them a little bit to help take some of the edge off of the things that they wouldn't normally get to do. But those are two organizations that are already up and running that I think have seen pretty early success. And it underscores exactly what Stacey, you've got to have that support network for these kids once they get there.
And Charles, I'm one of those kids. It's communities and schools.
Yeah.
And the funny story with that's exactly how I met Ed Crutchfield. I was speaking at a communities and schools event my sophomore year at Davidson, and that kind of sparked our relationship. But to your question, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience and just observing some family members who didn't make it out. One thing we don't really think about with kids who make it out like me is there's a lot of people in their family who are struggling with all kinds of life issues. And it may be somebody, for example, a mother, a brother, a cousin. And so when you make it out, some psychologists would, there's some term for it, but you have a guilt or a strong sense of obligation for those who didn't make it out. And one of the first things Ed told me when I met him at Davidson's campus, he calls me Bobo. So my nickname is Bobo. He said, he's crossed his legs and said, Bobo, I'm going to tell you something that you might not like it, but the best way to help your family is to go off and become successful. And he gave me an example of Michael Jordan and how he's been able to help thousands of people because he became what God intended him to be. But a lot of kids who make it out and get away from that environment and closeness to family will call them up and say, hey, I need $50 for, I got a text message last night. My nephew, he needs $100 for his utility bill. I'm thinking, you don't even work. How do you need $100 for your? But these kids have tremendous pressures and pulls that if you're not getting the psychological, emotional, and for me it's been strong spiritual support and awareness of, you made it out and there's a reason you made it out, and it's hard. So a lot of the kids who make it out end up falling back into the barrel from people grabbing on them, and nobody along the way is Communities and Schools is a great organization where you have a network of caring and loving individuals to say, hey, I know that's your family, but you've got to keep up the good fight. The kids who don't have that will implode. So there's organizations, as Charles mentioned and Stacey mentioned, that are looking at the problem from that angle, but it's a serious issue with kids and as we think through this problem.
All right, we've gone over a little bit, but I'm glad. I think it's good discussion. So a couple of things I want to leave you with. One is this question here. So as you're making significant decisions in your life, think about how will this decision impact the opportunity trajectory of our children, youth, and families. Two other things, this conversation is going to continue. Next weekend, we'll be having a class more intimate on talking about establishing a sense of caring within Charlotte. We'll skip the 20th for MLK weekend, but on the 27th, some members from the Outreach Council are also going to join us, where we can talk about, okay, let's turn some of this into action. We're not just going to sit here and talk and mull things over. So thank you, and our panelists don't have to attend, but they'd be more than welcome to join us in any of those discussions. Thank you very much for your time today.